In 1937, 4 men quietly made a plant illegal. Not because it was dangerous, because it could fuel every engine you own, diesel truck, gasoline car, generator, tractor, from a single acre of farmland. The Old Order Mennonites never forgot about it. They kept growing it, kept the knowledge alive, and when it became legal again in 2018, they were ready before anyone else. A university lab confirmed in 2010 what the Mennonites already knew: 97% conversion to biodiesel. 1 plant, 2 fuels, 0 modifications to your engine. The story of how this got buried is stranger than most people expect. Here is something almost nobody knows. Rudolf Diesel did not design his engine to run on petroleum. That feels wrong, because the words diesel and diesel fuel seem like they belong together, like they were always a package deal. But that connection was not something Diesel planned. It was something that happened after he was gone, and could not argue otherwise. Diesel filed his patent on February 28, 1892. His compression ignition engine, the most thermally efficient engine built to that point in history, was conceived around one specific idea: that farmers should be able to grow their own fuel. He was not thinking about oil wells or refineries. He was thinking about fields. In 1900, at the World Exposition in Paris, he ran his engine on pure peanut oil. The French government had asked him to. They wanted to demonstrate what their African colonies could produce. Diesel obliged. The engine ran so cleanly, so quietly, that most of the crowd watching had genuinely no idea it was burning a vegetable. He wrote afterward that his engine could be fed with vegetable oils and would help considerably in the development of agriculture. He pictured a world where any farmer could grow the fuel sitting in their own tank. Then, on the night of September 29, 1913, Diesel boarded a mail steamer called the Dresden in Antwerp, Belgium. He was heading to London to meet with the British Royal Navy about putting his engines in their submarines. He had dinner with the other passengers. He retired to his cabin. He left a standing request to be woken at 6:15 the next morning. When the steward knocked, the cabin was empty. The bed had not been touched. His nightshirt was laid out neatly, like he had set it there before going somewhere he planned to return from. His hat and overcoat were found folded under the railing at the ship's stern. 10 days later, a Dutch fishing crew pulled a body from the North Sea, too far gone to identify by sight. The personal effects in his pockets were later confirmed by his son to have been his father's. The newspapers split. Half called it a personal tragedy. The other half printed something harder to dismiss: that Diesel had been removed before he could hand the British Navy an engine that ran on crops instead of crude, by people who understood exactly what that would mean for the oil business. His wife, opening a bag he had given her before he boarded, found 200,000 German marks in cash. The bank records showed their accounts were nearly empty. He had moved everything before he left, like a man who knew he was not coming back. But Diesel was not the only person who understood what plants could do. There was another man, in a factory in Michigan, who got closer to actually pulling this off than anyone before or since. And what happened to his version of the dream is somehow even more deliberate. Henry Ford was not a subtle man when he had an idea he believed in. In 1925, he sat down with the New York Times and told them straight: the fuel of the future was going to come from fruit, from weeds, from sawdust, from almost anything you could ferment. His Model T, which came out in 1908, was built from the start to run on gasoline, pure ethanol, or any mix of the two. He was not hedging. He genuinely thought plant fuel was where things were headed, and he built his cars accordingly. By the 1930s, Ford was hosting conferences in Dearborn, Michigan, around a movement called Chemergy, the idea that American farmers should be growing the raw materials for American industry, instead of everything being dug out of the ground or shipped in from somewhere else. He funded it himself. At his Iron Mountain facility in Michigan, he ran a biomass conversion plant that turned hemp and other crops into methanol, charcoal fuel, tar, pitch, and industrial chemicals. Everything from plants. Everything grown in a single season. Then in August of 1941, he unveiled something that made headlines: a prototype car with body panels made from hemp, soy, wheat straw, and flax pressed together with resin. Lighter than steel, lighter than fiberglass. Ford stood in front of cameras and swung an axe directly into the trunk lid. The axe bounced off. The panel did not dent. The car ran on hemp ethanol. Ford was 77 years old. He had brought George Washington Carver in to help with the development. He stood there in front of reporters, swinging an axe at a car made out of crops. And he genuinely believed this was where America was going. But by the time he unveiled that car, the road to get there had already been closed. 4 years earlier, while Ford was still working toward this, a law slipped through Congress so quietly that most Americans never saw it happen. And the specific word the law used to describe its target was chosen with real care. Chosen precisely because most people would not recognize it. That word, and the men behind it, are the reason you have never heard any of this before. Harry Anslinger needed a new job. That is really where this starts. He had been running the Federal Bureau of Prohibition. When Prohibition ended in 1933, his department had no reason to exist anymore, and neither did he. So he did what career bureaucrats have always done when the problem they were hired to solve disappears. He found a new problem. He found cannabis. But he did not call it cannabis. He did not call it hemp. He called it marijuana, a Mexican slang term that the vast majority of Americans had never come across. That choice was not accidental. If he had used the word cannabis, every doctor in the country would have recognized it as a plant that had been in the United States pharmacopoeia for decades. If he had said hemp, every farmer would have known exactly what he was talking about. A rope crop, a paper crop, a fuel crop, a plant their families had grown since the colonial era. He also had friends who needed this plant gone, and their reasons had nothing to do with public safety. William Randolph Hearst owned newspapers, timberland, and paper mills. Hemp could produce paper faster and cheaper than wood pulp. It was a direct threat to his business. The DuPont family had just patented nylon and a new chemical process for wood-based paper. Hemp fiber competed with the nylon. Hemp paper competed with the wood pulp process. Andrew Mellon, the Secretary of the Treasury, and at that point the wealthiest man in America, had invested heavily in DuPont. Mellon was also Harry Anslinger's father-in-law. He had personally put Anslinger in his position. These men did not need to plot anything in secret. They had newspapers, a federal bureau, and a Congress that was not paying close attention. Hearst's papers ran front-page stories connecting marijuana to violence, to moral decay, to fears that played well in 1937. Anslinger testified before Congress with cases that had no real medical evidence behind them. The American Medical Association sent a doctor named William Woodward to oppose the act. He stood in front of Congress and told them the claims were not backed by science. They dismissed him and passed the act anyway. Now here is the detail that should genuinely bother you. In 1937, if you were driving across the Midwest, you could pull into one of 2,000 service stations and fill your tank with something called a grole. 2,000 stations. Indiana, South Dakota, Kansas, Nebraska, a real fuel network built by farmers for drivers. A grole was an ethanol gasoline blend produced at a plant in Atchison, Kansas, backed by the same chemurgy movement Ford had been championing for years. 2 blends on offer, a grole 5 and a grole 10. The brochure said, "Try a tankful, you'll be thankful." Customers did, and they came back. A grole sold for 17 cents a gallon. Leaded gasoline sold for 16. A single penny separated plant-based fuel from petroleum at the pump. That 1 cent was all the oil industry needed. The American Petroleum Institute launched public campaigns, calling ethanol an inferior fuel. Their own spokesman referred to the movement supporters as dream chemists and armchair farmers in the press. Between 1933 and 1939, petroleum interests killed 19 federal bills and 31 separate state bills that would have supported alcohol fuel blending. Every tax incentive that could have closed that penny gap was killed in committee before it ever reached a vote. The managers of the Atchison plant started reporting things that were hard to write off as bad luck. Deliberate market interference, pressure from an industry that understood, with complete clarity, what it was looking at. By 1939, the plant closed. 2,000 stations went dark. The only commercial plant fuel network ever built on American soil was gone in under 3 years, dismantled in the same narrow window that the Marijuana Tax Act had finished off hemp. And then, 5 months after the law that killed hemp took effect, Popular Mechanics published a cover story with the headline, New billion-dollar crop. The article celebrated hemp as the standard fiber of the world and predicted a new agricultural economy built around it. The editors had no idea the law had already passed. By the time that magazine landed on doorsteps across America, it was already illegal to grow the crop it was celebrating. The future showed up at its own funeral, wearing its best clothes, and nobody had thought to tell it what had happened. But there was one community that knew exactly what had been taken from them. And unlike everyone else, they did not forget. Old Order Mennonites settled the Shenandoah Valley and the Pennsylvania countryside in the early 1700s. They brought hemp with them the same way they brought their faith, not as a luxury, not as an experiment, as something foundational. Rope, canvas, lamp oil, paper, medicine. Lancaster County in Pennsylvania has an entire township called Hempfield, named specifically because of how much hemp was growing there before 1870. Historian Les Stark documented more than 100 water-powered mills processing hemp fiber along Lancaster County waterways alone. It was everywhere. It was ordinary. It was just part of how life worked. When the 1937 Act came through, the Mennonites lost a crop their families had grown for over 2 centuries. They did what they always do when the outside world does something they had no say in. They adapted, quietly, without drama. Tobacco, dairy, corn, and soy like everyone else on the block. But the knowledge did not go anywhere. It lived the way Mennonite knowledge always lives. In the practical conversations that happen around a kitchen table, in a barn in January, between a grandfather who remembers and a grandson who is just starting to ask questions. No documentation, no archive, no YouTube channel, just memory, passed carefully from one generation to the next. Other Americans forgot hemp existed. The Mennonites just waited. They are exceptionally patient people. They have outlasted movements, trends, administrations, and agricultural fads for 300 years by simply not forgetting what actually works. When the 2018 Farm Bill made hemp federally legal again, they were ready before almost anyone else in the country. Young Mennonite and Amish farmers across Lancaster County moved quickly, planting hemp using methods their ancestors had built over generations. No synthetic pesticides, no artificial fertilizer, much of it harvested by hand with horse-drawn equipment. What they produced was good enough to command premium prices from buyers in California and the Midwest. They did not need a research grant or a government pilot program to understand this plant. They had known what it could do since before the revolution, and what it can do, specifically for diesel engines, specifically right now, was confirmed in a laboratory in Connecticut in 2010, with results so consistent that the researchers almost did not believe them the first time. Professor Richard Parnas and his team at the University of Connecticut took industrial hemp seed oil and ran it through standard biodiesel chemistry in their lab. The process is called transesterification, which is a long word for something that is actually pretty straightforward. You mix plant oil with methanol and a small amount of lye, which acts as a catalyst. The mixture reacts and separates into 2 distinct layers. The top layer is raw biodiesel. The bottom layer is glycerin, which you can use to make soap, so nothing is wasted. You wash the biodiesel with water, let it dry, and pour it into any diesel engine ever manufactured. Not a modified engine, not a special engine, any diesel engine. Parnas found that 97% of the hemp seed oil converted successfully to biodiesel. Not 90, not 93, 97. It met American biodiesel quality standards. It met European biodiesel quality standards. And then it showed something the team had not gone looking for. It outperformed every other plant-based biodiesel in cold weather conditions. When temperatures dropped, hemp biodiesel stayed functional longer than the alternatives. Parnas told reporters afterward that if someone was already growing hemp, they might be able to produce enough fuel from the seeds alone to power their entire farm operation. Here is what that looks like on paper. 1 acre of hemp produces roughly 700 pounds of grain. Press that grain, and you get about 22 gallons of oil, which converts to approximately 20 gallons of finished biodiesel. Enough to run a diesel generator for weeks. Enough to keep a tractor working through a full planting season. That same acre produces over 5,000 pounds of stalk. Those stalks are loaded with cellulose. Break the cellulose down into simple sugars. Ferment the sugars. run them through a still, and you get ethanol, the exact same substance already blended into every gallon of E10 gasoline sitting at your local pump right now. The only difference between what comes out of your gas station nozzle and what comes off a hemp stalk is that one is made from corn, and the other comes from leftover material of a plant that already gave you diesel fuel from its seeds. The equipment to make the biodiesel yourself can be built from a used electric water heater for under $300, with plans available for free online. A federal fuel alcohol permit, free to apply for, through the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, gives you the legal right to distill ethanol for motor fuel on your property. The process is essentially the same one distillers have used for centuries. The only difference now is that you have paperwork on your wall instead of a lookout posted by the road. Brazil figured all of this out in the 1970s. Millions of Brazilian cars ran on high ethanol blends for decades. No engine failures, no special modifications, no drama. The technology has been proven for 50 years on another continent. What was missing in America was not the science, not the equipment, not the chemistry. What was missing was the legal right to grow the crop. Since 2018, you have it.